Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, many consider leaving their jobs or changing careers altogether. Devo is hosting the second annual SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to analysts and encourage organizations to improve their job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo and other cybersecurity industry professionals on October 19th for sessions and panels focused on de-stressing, SOC career development, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to register.
And welcome back to the show. But first, let me reintroduce you to a man who walked out of a cigar shop. What? It could happen. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We're here for the news. It was weird. The first segment was pre-recorded. So this is the second segment. We're going to talk about news. I'm going to introduce the host first. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome. Josh, you're muted.
That doesn't help. Yeah, as always, a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
I mean, but that was the most intelligent thing you've said all week.
Well,
It's so
my wife
smooth.
that.
You're really smooth.
Miss Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
I am. And I brought back my tiny moonshine.
Love the Tiny Moonshine.
Oh.
I mean, it wouldn't be a show now without Tiny Moonshine. So,
Oh, tiny
thank you for that.
moonshine.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here, back from traveling around. You know, I was in Italy. 2 guys walked into a bar. The third one ducked.
Sporting is Charlie Sheen. This outfit inspired by Charlie Sheen.
And Tiger Blood.
Sam Bone is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Nice to have you. So, is that everyone? Did I
No.
get everyone? Tyler was supposed to be here.
You didn't get
Larry's
everybody?
here with us. To my left. How did I miss that? To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce.
Thanks.
Good Lord.
I missed last week, so that's why you're out of
A
practice.
little out of practice.
A little out of practice. And it's not the first session. And
Yep.
yeah.
You can check out our library of on-demand webcasting technical trainings, which I thought, were those on YouTube? I don't know. Some might still be on demand. Many of them I think are on YouTube as well. But you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand and check those out. And I did not set the speed for my teleprompter. So if you do have a guest suggestion, you can go to securityweekly.com/guests, fill out the form, and we'll review those, excuse me, on a regular basis. Okay. Now, the security news. Where would we like to begin? Should I just pick a story to begin with every week?
Yeah.
Or should I ask where do you want to begin? Do you folks really care?
Pick one. Throw a dart.
Where we begin? I'll just go with the first one that pops up on my screen, which is my story number 8. Never before seen malware has infected hundreds of Linux and Windows devices. What I thought was interesting about
Windows
this one...
and Linux?
Yes. So in the description, it says is designed to work across several architectures, including ARM, Intel i386, MIPS, and PowerPC.
PowerPC?
We haven't seen a PowerPC in a long
Good
time.
Lord.
I had a NAS device that was PowerPC. I mean, before I had Sun systems that were PowerPC.
Yep.
And a Mac that was PowerPC.
Yep.
And then I feel like no one gave any love to PowerPC anymore. Like, what happened to PowerPC?
Died.
Died.
Like, got replaced with, x86, didn't it? Largely.
Kinda.
Kinda? I don't know.
And then,
question.
all of our embedded devices went
Embedded,
to
yeah,
MIPS and ARM.
Yeah, it's true. So Windows and Linux, a large-scale ransomware distribution botnet, it leverages spam to grow. It propagates through known CVEs and brute forced as well as stolen SSH keys. Which is really interesting. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It's called Chaos. Chaos. Black Lotus Labs, the research arm of security firm Lumen, is credited with its discovery.
I'm still blown away by the PowerPC part.
Yeah, we're hung up on that too.
Like, does any modern architecture still use PowerPC?
I haven't seen it in a long time. But I love studying. This is how nerdy we all are. Like, because we do things like, I like reading about different processor architectures.
Mhm.
This is what I do for fun in my spare time. Is I go to like the PowerPC Wikipedia page. Of course, it was a RISC-based platform. Created by 1991. That's not right. That doesn't seem right.
No.
It seems older than that, I thought.
So-
Cornerstone, blah blah blah. It's not a very good Wikipedia page.
Sam, you have a comment in there?
I was,
Oh, is that Lee that had a comment in there?
yeah, I was wondering if the devices that are PowerPC are the routers they're talking about. Although a lot of those are MIPS chips, not
No.
PowerPC.
It's mostly MIPS, ARM. I would
Right,
put ARM up
right.
there along with MIPS and along with x86. To be honest with you, I mean
a select few x86 stuff.
Intel ME, as we talked about several weeks ago, that was originally an ARC processor that shared the same lineage as a Super NES, which is like one of the most obscure processor chipset architecture facts. But yeah, I haven't seen Power. So is Macintosh PowerBook. PowerBook is what I had. That was my first Mac until 2005.
I had what was that, Series 5 Mac? The PowerPC Mac Series 5. That was the big metal liquid-cooled case. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That was PowerPC, but that was Christmas 15 years ago.
Yeah, I'd believe it.
Video game consoles, satellites, and the Curiosity and Perseverance rovers on Mars are PowerPC based.
I mean, you think about when they started the design process for those.
Right.
Like, kind of makes sense, right?
I want to say AIX systems. I had one. Were those PowerPC or something different?
No, I don't think they were PowerPC.
Yeah, I want to
No,
say
they're
yeah.
not PowerPC. What was? All right, now we're getting way down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Like in, 2000, the year 2000 or 2001. What was Paul's AIX systems running in the lab? Okay,
Who cares?
we'll table that for a different discussion. Oh, we were talking about malware. It's called Chaos. That's what we were talking about.
Well, we delved into chaos on that one. That's for
we
sure.
did. We went down a little rabbit hole. Blah blah. Anything
I
else
think you're right
interesting
on
about this?
AIX.
AIX was
Oh.
PowerPC.
Yeah,
I was right. See, I'm not losing it.
came from the Itty Bitty Machine Company, of course.
Of course. So that was a history lesson on PowerPC when we were supposed to be talking about cross-platform malware. I just thought it was interesting that it runs on, so it must be targeting largely embedded devices. It says small office routers, FreeBSD boxes, and large enterprise servers.
So if
So they're just-
folks are still running, AS400s? PowerPC?
But that
AIX?
means, but it says Linux and Windows, but also through FreeBSD in there. Like that's a separate
Yeah, that's a whole different
That's a
animal.
separate compilation script I got to run to compile it for BSD versus Linux versus Windows. And then I got to compile it for each of those processor architectures. Or if I'm using an x86 based computer, I have to cross compile it
Yep.
for those other architectures. And we all know how that goes. Like, would much rather have more than one root canal in a sitting than cross compile code. Right.
Wow.
So I thought that was the interesting part, that it supported all these different architectures. And
It's interesting because we don't think about the things that have been left behind. We don't think about we all know about that VAX that's still running a silver mine, right? And has been for 30 years or something. How many PDP-11s are actually still in production use? The answer is more than you would bloody well think. And so there's entire architectures that are not receiving, it's not just security patches, they're not receiving any damn thing.
Including support contracts.
Oh, dear God, don't even go there.
Yeah. If we may go down a rabbit hole for another moment, Josh, you hear about the a bunch of PDP-11s and some service contract stuff that happened, in the 80s?
Rabbit hole number two.
No, go for it. Please explain.
Effectively, what happened was one of these service contract folks that actually serviced PDP-11s well into their life, all of a sudden noticed that they were having a hard time finding some spare parts and such because there was one group that was buying as many used PDP-11s from the market that they could.
Right.
So the service company called this company and basically tried to sell them service contracts on all these PDP-11s they were buying. Like, we're the best, we have the biggest inventory and we have the smartest technicians and all that type of stuff. And they said, yeah, no thanks. And they kept trying and they kept trying. And they were trying for like a year, like heavy sales tactics to get into this place to sell them support contracts on these PDP-11s. And they finally got one person to say, no, we don't need any of the service contracts on them. And like, well, but you're buying a bunch of them and you're obviously using them, so why don't you need it? And they said, we're actually strapping them to nuclear bombs and using them as the data collection agent. So
there's no service needed into that.
They're blowing them up.
Wow.
Yep. If you can service it, you can have it.
Right.
And you get a nightlight because you're glow in the dark afterwards.
Yes.
It's interesting. I mean, continuing the rabbit hole slightly, there are actually corporate departments.
Number 3 for those following along at home.
No. This is a continuation of that rabbit hole. There are corporate departments that are out there just to find mainframe parts on eBay, because there are companies, banks, and large financial institutions, as well as others, that are like, no, this mainframe is never going anywhere. Buy enough spare parts so that we have 10 or 20 years of service out of it. Well, yeah, are we actually going to have 10 or 20 years? Trust me, it's not going anywhere. Buy every spare part you can find on eBay. There are people that their entire job is going on eBay and various other services around the world, by the way, and finding spare parts for their mainframes and mini computers.
I feel
and
like
so on and so forth.
This should be like in a book, like post-apocalyptic server maintenance or something like that. This is craziness.
Well, I wonder if a lot of people still go to like the government excess auctions and stuff too.
Yeah,
I did that before. My brother bought a bunch of servers at an auction.
Absolutely. I was going to say, or you could just look on the roof of your building. I don't know if you saw my story number 2, but like this has to be a bad day for the IT security team that like saw indicators that someone was on the inside of the network. I think they said it was like an Atlassian Jira server was acting weird or something like that.
It was, yeah. Atlassian Confluence play page.
Was a Confluence. So the team then took steps to trace the Wi-Fi signal, used a fluke system to identify the Wi-Fi device. What do those go for, Larry?
Thousands? A couple thousand, 3,000 to 5,000.
This led them to the roof where they found a modified DJI Matrix 600. Did I say that right? Matrix 600?
Sure.
A modified DJI Phantom were discovered. The Phantom drone was in fine condition and had a modified Wi-Fi Pineapple device, but the Matrix drone was carrying a case that contained a Raspberry Pi, several batteries, a GPD mini laptop, a 4G modem, and another Wi-Fi device. I didn't know that must be a larger drone that can haul some gear, because that laptop I looked up weighs about a pound.
So a DJI Phantom 4 can carry 6 pounds of payload.
Gotcha.
And
what about a Matrix 600?
That's what I was just going to look up here.
Well, this is why, by the way, that they restricted drones, unlicensed drones, to 250 grams?
Yeah, but if I'm a cyber criminal, Josh, I'm already breaking the law.
Yeah.
So like,
I know that. You know, let's get. You want to go to gun control laws? Because no, let's not.
Right.
But you're talking about they're trying to restrict that. And by the way, I live really close to Delaware. I used to live in Delaware. So if you drive a certain way in Delaware, there are big flashing road signs that say no drone flights around here. Thank you very much. We will shoot them down.
Yeah, you have to enforce that. But like most targets, right, for attackers, there could be laws or FAA regulations. However, who's enforcing those? So at night, I fly a drone. What's that, Mandy?
Wouldn't that be part of the fun, is that you're getting the drone in where, it's not supposed to be? Who is actually tracking that? Nobody.
Right. Unless it's a very high security facility and there is technology that you can implement and purchase and stuff. that helps with this problem. But
Right.
Well, like at the Atlanta airport or at the airports where they have
sure,
the tracking devices that take down drones. I don't think that this East Coast financial institution ever thought that that would be an issue.
right. That's what I'm saying. That I think the use case will be is where the anti-drone technology is likely not to be, and maybe you fly a test. Maybe you take a cheap drone, fly it up there, and see what happens.
So the Matrice 600 is weight with 6 of the heavier batteries is 9.6 kilograms, and the max takeoff weight is 15 kilograms.
Gotcha.
The difference is about an 11-pound payload. So, yep.
Interesting.
Damn.
Yep. Hovering time with the light batteries with a 6 kilogram payload is 16 minutes. And with the heavy batteries with a 5.5 kilogram payload is 18 minutes.
Yeah, so just enough time to get it up on the roof, land it, and have the batteries
Probably more than enough.
power your attack tools, your Wi-Fi pineapple, break into the network, attack stuff.
Well, the threat model here seems very much like one I heard 10 years ago, where you just mail a box containing an iPhone to a company. It'll sit in the mailroom for a few days and then come back undeliverable. Seems to accomplish the same thing without the drone.
I saw that talk. That was 2017?
Long time ago.
Larry, did you give one of those talks?
Something very similar, if not. Certainly to deliver Wi-Fi attacks and detect routes and paths and determine Wi-Fi in transit and that type of stuff. But
I remember somebody also called it an F-box, and you just threw it up on the roof. This was prior to drones and such, and they built drop boxes that they would throw. Basically, fuck it, it's disposable.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And a lot more technology out there to do that.
So reading through this attack, I thought it was pretty interesting, and I'm like, all right. So the initial was that they used the user credentials to gain access to the Wi-Fi. I'm like, how at first I was curious about how they get in the Wi-Fi. Like they use the user's credentials to authenticate to the enterprise network with PEEP client with stolen credentials. But they said there was something along the lines of that they used one of the drones to acquire user credentials. I want to know how they did that.
Actually, it's in the article.
Yeah.
Was it? It's in the article. No, seriously. They had the MAC address. Either they were using SMAC or something similar to simulate a MAC address of a user that was working from home on a regular basis. My guess is that they used the drone over his house or near his house, or the equipment near his house, not necessarily in a drone, maybe in a car or whatever, pulled the handshake and did it from there.
Which handshake?
His home Wi-Fi.
Okay, so
and then when you can spy on the home Wi-Fi, you probably got the credentials that way. They basically attacked his house, got the credentials through spying through his Wi-Fi at his house, and then got
either
there.
spying from his Wi-Fi or machine in the middling, evil twinning his home Wi-Fi with the lower security. Heck, they could have even done it at the office.
Could have, but it's easier with the home Wi-Fi. Nobody's monitoring it.
True, very true.
Now, see, and I didn't read it that way. I read it that this was after they'd already gained access. I didn't. It says that the user whose MAC address was used to gain partial access to the company Wi-Fi network was also logged in at home several miles away. So the user was active off-site, but someone within Wi-Fi range of the building was trying to wirelessly use that user's MAC address. See, and I read that and I took it as like, this must have been, imagine the moment of somebody realizing like, wait,
this person's in two places at once.
Yes.
The call is coming from inside the building.
Yes.
The pool is on the roof.
That is correct.
Well, but also it looks like they were taking advantage of some weak spots in the company, like restructuring, rebranded, new building, new whatever. In other words, they caught them with their pants not fully fastened here.
Like how you put that, Lee.
The latest Darknet Diaries, I believe, was chronicling a physical penetration test, and during it, they were mentioning bypassing NAC, and before that, they said they had observed some printers. And I turned to my son, gets up very early to go to high school, and I was like, "Dude, get ready. They're going to talk about cloning the MAC address for the printer. I'm like, just wait for it. And then it came up. And I was like, see? I told you so. And he's like, Dad, you are a nerd. I'm like, ah! Anyway.
Well, I feel like this was a fascinating story, but it also made me think of the use case for Li-Fi.
Ooh.
Are you familiar with Li-Fi, the wireless transmitted through light instead of through radio frequency? Because then that would nullify the drone being able to sniff it or get access.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used Li-Fi enough to know all of the attack surface, but I think there's probably a good enough attack surface there if you could sniff light or be able to intercept the light. I mean,
because you can't. It doesn't go through walls or anything.
It goes through windows, though.
You can flop them?
What's that?
Yeah, you just use a telescope.
Yep, telescope.
Basically.
Good camera. I mean,
unless you're using a laser, you are dispersing light in a cone. Yep. And if you can be within that cone, you can, or use a telescope to get yourself within that cone, you can see it.
Is that like the cone of silence? Remember that?
It's the cone of light.
It's the cone of light.
But yeah,
younger listeners are like, what the heck is he talking about?
Get smart.
Get smart. That's exactly
right. Yeah, come on. Get smart.
But to your point.
You want to know the scary thing? Even the remake, the younger listeners don't know what that is.
Probably not.
But to the point, I think that, there's probably a lot better restriction on the spread of light outside of your building. Even with Windows, it's and I don't know what frequency wavelength of light it's using and how small the pulses are, and how typical glass would affect that, and its transmission properties and those types of things. But
and I'm wondering too, because I think with Wi-Fi, since it can be transmitted on all light frequencies, even if the actual output is not detectable to the eye. So you could still have, and how did that work then? If the window is open, if it's transmitting, but it's not actually visible to the naked eye in here, would a laser or anything else be able to pick it up?
Wait, say that again? I'm sorry.
Sorry. I'm probably not saying this right. Well, thinking about the physical parameters. So if the window is there, the Wi-Fi is transmitting internally inside the thing, but it's transmitting at where it's non-visible spectrum.
Well, if it's non-visible spectrum, you may not be able to see it, but anything that can see that spectrum can see it.
Yeah, the one I saw was modulating the lights that you're using for illumination at like a megahertz. So the human eye can't perceive it, but anything that receives the light, which is just the same light you're using for illumination, can receive it. It's not that different than power line networking.
Okay.
So then if it's dark outside and you had something that could figure out where it was emanating from the windows, you would know that they had light.
You could shine a telescope on it from any distance, and you could just pick the signal out of the flickering light.
Yeah.
Coming soon to a research paper, and you probably already one exists on it.
Could be. I don't think there's a lot of a general adoption of Li-Fi currently. It's one of those technologies that I haven't seen it take off.
Yeah.
It's used for building bridges, building-to-building communication across populated roadways and things like that. It is weather intolerant. In other words, bad weather can really knock it for a loop.
Yep.
But it's incredibly high bandwidth across a certain distance. I think it'll do maybe a kilometer at best. For good bandwidth.
Yeah, but that's free space optics with a laser, right?
Basically, not with a laser, just with a very, very. It's highly focused, but it's not a laser.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay. Because I've done the free space with the laser before, and that was also subject to some weather events like fogging of the lens, which they kind of solved.
Oops.
And some really, really dense fog would actually cause some problems for it as well.
Larry, I want to talk about my story number 3, which I assigned to you.
Oh, God.
And it sounds like you didn't read.
Wait, no, which one? Your story?
The race to my story number 3, the race to native code execution in PLCs.
Nope, I read it.
This is a great.
I just didn't know it was your story number 3. I saw it in Slack.
I summed this up as basically kind of similar to when you find that one page in a web app that doesn't check for authentication but lets you do stuff.
Yep.
It's kind of similar how they were able to manipulate memory and gain access to the protected memory region where the key was stored. Yep. I think I got that correct.
That sounds about right. I want to say that they found an exploit that allowed them to escape the user memory restricted sandbox,
right,
to gain access to the protected segments of memory in which the key was stored, and they were able to retrieve the 2 different keys that they needed.
Right, because it was asymmetric.
Yep, because there was one command that required didn't do any memory region checks to see if it was protected.
Right. So I like the way they phrased it. We used a redacted. They didn't give you the opcode.
Yep.
They used an opcode which has no security memory region checks to copy an internal struct containing a native pointer to a valid memory area to a writable memory area. Like I said, there's an app on your webpage that isn't protected by it. I like the way they said it, though. They said it very nerdy.
Yep. And I think the most terrifying part about this is when these particular Siemens Symantec devices were developed, it was just about a decade ago, when doing fixed keys were still a thing, especially in ICS networks.
So wait, that means it's the same public-private key on every device?
Correct. Right. Every device in the Symantec series, from my understanding.
Right.
So all of the models in the Symantec series, because they were all ended up being managed by the same backend.
The S7 1200, 1500.
Yes.
And I think it
Siemens
was all
devices, and Clarity is a ICS security company, and this is their research arm, just for context.
Yep. And I want to say that they found that there were a couple of other devices that were also affected by this after the fact. But I could be wrong. I'd have to give it another read here. But terrifying that every one of these devices sold, the 1200 and the 1500, were using the same keys, and if you had one, you could potentially compromise or interact with every single one of them. But 10
years
years
ago,
ago,
that something I get on eBay, trivially, just to be clear.
Yeah, you have all the keys. You have one key, you got them all.
And I can get the keys and then basically own everything on some poor schlub's factory, manufacturing facility, whatever.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But the key was hidden behind layers of encryption that prevented anybody from finding it for 10 years. So maybe it's not so bad.
True.
Is there anybody near Sam that can smack him?
Me?
No, Sam, I mean, okay, you're right. You're right.
But that we know of. We're seeing this now because they did the research. We don't know that someone else hasn't done the research previously and just not disclosed it.
I mean, if anybody here knows anything about firmware and companies that install things with, firmware and very, very different mindsets than your standard, like OT stuff, how often do they update these things?
Never.
Not that often.
Yeah, never.
So it doesn't matter, and Sam, so no offense meant, but it doesn't matter that it took 10 years. You have to build these with the concept, almost like a NASA-like concept. It's not that it can't fail. You have to build them so they can't not work.
Mm-hmm. And that would be nice. Can anybody do that? I mean, it seems like everything you build is hacked within 10 years.
But can't you just let people swap the keys out? But then you have to see. This is the rabbit hole you go down when I think about one of our other stories on firmware that mentions keys. Is if you can administratively allow someone to swap out keys, you have to protect that process, and then what protects that process. Because you don't want the attackers to basically use these key management tools or processes, which is why we have.
Are we going back to the compiler malwaring the compiler? Compiler.
No, I'm not actually. A key management, I guess, is the issue.
Yeah,
that's the issue. Oh. Right?
So if you allow some administrative function to update the keys, you need to protect that administrative function
with a key, and then we restore that key.
And then that administrative function requires protection. That requires protection, which that's a very delicate.
We need like a key phrase for that, because we're coming back to that story every damn week.
We are.
Yeah, it's the compiler cube story. Or something like that. I don't know.
Something like that. So while we're on the topic of keys, it's a pretty well. Not that I want to make this all about keys, because I don't. But Intel's Alder Lake BIOS was leaked.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, did you get your copy before they took it down?
They
haven't taken it down.
I don't know
the
what
repo was taken down. I hope you grabbed it.
I don't think they've taken it down, have they?
My friend Bob told me that he has a copy.
Okay, good.
That's what I've been told to say by my attorneys.
Yes.
So, what I can find by reading online and doing nothing more but reading what's publicly available online.
Yes.
It appears this leak was a developer that was working on UEFI implementations for what appears to be Lenovo Yoga laptops that are relatively newer. These are 12th gen laptops. The leak contained binary blobs from different manufacturers. So, like, you've got on the motherboard, right?
Sure.
You've got a Realtek something. You've got a
Broadcom
something. And Realtek and Broadcom are like, hey, you need, like, drivers and software. Here are binary blobs.
USB controller and
all that stuff.
All that stuff.
Components is how I refer to that. So UEFI source code, which is interesting. I mean, there's Tiano or EDK2, which is the open source reference code, but this is Intel's actual UEFI source code. Some keys, which we'll get to, and scripts and configs to help OEMs package all this crap together, because you've got UEFI, you've got some code from Intel, you've got some code from here, you've got to like package and process this all together. So there was like a bunch of scripts to do that. I mean, among other things too. So the keys, which everyone seems to really like hyper focus on, in my opinion, is not really that much of a threat, unless the public key that was the counterpart to any of the keys in the leak was fused into hardware. So typically in a OEM manufacturing process, your HP, Dell, Lenovo, System 76, framework, whatever, you get this computer built for you, and then you've got to like pull all these components, software components together, and then you've got to like finalize the build process, which says, I'm going to put this public key in this fuse, and I'm going to flip the fuse. Sometimes sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's software that can seal the fuse, and then that public key's in there. So only code that's signed with the private key can then be run on the system.
So like OTP, one time programmable type of.
Correct. Or FPF is how a field programmable fuse is all. But there's all, I mean, again, the answer is it depends. There's all types of implementations of it. I'm just trying to speak generically. So what I believe happened here is these are like dev QA kind of keys. So like the private key counterpart was never fused to any production system, is my guess, from what I've read online. So also, there seemed to be some confusion on Twitter and some blog posts about this issue. There's definitely a difference between UEFI Secure Boot, BIOS Guard, signed BIOS updates, and Boot Guard. Essentially, they all used like different keys or signatures or hashes, right? I asked one of my coworkers about signed BIOS updates. I mean, it's basically done in software. There's a capsule in your BIOS update, right? And the corresponding key to unlock that is in software, in usually, again, it depends, sometimes in a UEFI variable that's stored in the BIOS. And that's just to go, your BIOS update has been signed, right? It's very different from Boot Guard and BIOS Guard, which don't make me explain either one of those.
And which one did you say that was for with the capsule?
The capsule is usually for signed BIOS updates.
Okay.
From your BIOS
Because I want to say in the some of the discussion I was reading too that the capsule part came up, and that it would effectively allow you to re-sign a modified BIOS into that capsule.
So that was for Boot Guard, which is different. Okay. Boot Guard is a different process for protecting the software that boots your computer.
That was my understanding, was that some of this leak contained that. But I could be like mixed messages.
So there was
so
a Boot Guard signing key that was in there, but again, the corresponding private key would have to be fused to a board in order for you to bypass Boot Guard.
Got it. And the private key wasn't included.
Someone in response to Mark Ermolov's Twitter talked about this, Larry. In this Nicholas Schlegg his byline says he's a firmware security engineer, and he definitely knows what he's talking about, because I believe this to be, and I checked with my coworkers, this is highly accurate. It actually reads kind of verbatim from what one of my coworkers typed back to me in Slack, who has a lot of experience in firmware design in hackery, whose name is Yuri, by the way. But Nicholas says, if that is really a key manifest signing key, and there are any machines that have the hash of the public key fused into the FPF or field programmable fuse, BootGuard on that platform is under near full control of essentially the attacker. One can generate a new boot policy, which again, when it's in manufacturing mode, is the boot policy is one thing that gets loaded on it. A new boot policy signing key to protect any BootGuard protectable range, including none. So like basically with that scenario, you could change the BootGuard policy to say don't do anything. Similar to how some UEFI secure boot and other secure boot attacks work. So I spend way too much time reading because that's my day. Because
that's the only way you can is to read about it, right?
Right. So read about it online.
Right.
Did I say I talked about it with coworkers? Maybe. I mean, you have no.
Well, I mean, you talked about it with coworkers and you discussed what was available on the internet.
Available on the internet.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I covered that point. I just want to make sure. Did you have something before I go into like what I think really matters about this? Okay.
Nope. Go.
So my two kind of talking points were that the supply chain for firmware on computers, on your computer, like PC servers, laptops, kind of firmware, the supply chain is what I would call, air quotes, a hot mess. Hot mess. Because again, you've got if you were to go look at the source code from what Bob told me, you can see all these scripts pulling in all these various components from all these different manufacturers, and like you have to trust those different manufacturers. You have to trust Intel. You have to make your own modifications to UEFI. Sometimes that UEFI source code is from the public reference code. Sometimes it's customized. You can actually look at how much it is matching or not. So the supply chain is like a super hot mess on your PC. So that was one thing that if you look at the details surrounding this leak that you should come away with, you should be very frightened. You should be actually kind of surprised your PC actually boots and your peripherals actually work, for one. Two, this, to me, the other big takeaway, it gives researchers valuable information to conduct further research. Like the source code that Bob told me that was out there is stuff that like has never been available to the public. Like this is like amazing documentation if you're doing security research into things like microcode updates. So there's things about model specific registers, where if you're like reverse engineering microcode to figure out how microcode works on your Intel processor, you'd have to reverse engineer it. With this leak, it kind of gives researchers a bit of a map,
big of a leg
up and some information about that. So I think there'll be more to come on that.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't think you're gonna. So there's like scripts to check to see if the keys that were leaked had any role in your computer.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to find that because I don't think these were ever rolled out to production, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting if you think about some of the ways that you can do some of the key deployment. Well, I think about like all of the secure boot options, and Paul, I could grab an ice cube when you got a minute. But I think about some of these like secure boot options we used to see where you could have multiple keys encrypt your drive. So that like you had your own personal key, and then like the enterprise admin could unlock your drive as well.
That's BitLocker.
It was
BitLocker's that was before BitLocker.
It was before BitLocker when I was dealing with that, but it was similar types of things like because they have multiple keys that could be written from the private public key side, whichever key could be written.
Well, it's kind of like a secure boot is a similar thing, right? Like there's Microsoft has a key in the PKI chain, right? Canonical has a key in the PKI chain, which means software that's signed that has a specific hash can be from either one of those keys, so your system boots. Correct. Yes. Yeah, and it gets confusing. Is that it's the private key and the public key, the hash of the yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You probably need some hash before you understand it.
It depends.
So I was actually thinking about this, and the question in my head was, what is likely to come as a remediation step? Is Intel going to release an update? Some of this stuff is CPU architecture stuff. They're not going to change, right?
I don't think there was any vulnerabilities, Lee, that have been discovered yet. So I don't believe that Intel or any of the manufacturers have anything to fix, right? Intel actually released a statement and said, This is actually covered in our bug bounty program. Like, it's unfortunate that it leaked. It's not Intel's fault that it leaked, but they said all this code's covered under bug bounty. So if you find a vulnerability, please submit to our bug bounty program, which I thought was a responsible thing to do from Intel.
Yeah, very good.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of IP being reclaimed rather than a vulnerability. In other words, some trade secrets got out. Now they're going to have to adjust to make them less. Come up with some other proprietary solution or something.
Yeah, typically what Intel will do that I've observed in those cases is add like further protections. So they'll keep the features that are there, much like Microsoft, right, has to maintain the operating system. Intel will maintain those legacy features, but add like new features, like new bits that you can flip to add additional protections. Okay. In the case with keys, it's also like you could have software and scripts and whatever that checked for this stuff too. Like there was a certificate that was compromised, you can just go look for that, right? In hashes of whatever. Secure boot is essentially, that's how it was set up so that we could revoke until we get to drivers, which is a totally different thing. But yeah, I don't think, Leah, there's anything to fix right now. Maybe in the future.
Okay. No, that's cool. So where I was going to go actually is I was thinking if they were going to do something, what are the odds of it actually getting deployed thoroughly?
Well,
much more esoteric question.
And again, it depends is the answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It depends which operating system you're running and what kind of hardware that you have.
Wait, you're supposed to update your UEFI?
Sometimes it's updated for you. So like if you've got a Microsoft Surface, Microsoft takes care of all that for you. And your firmware updates come down because Microsoft control, much like Apple controls the software and the hardware, especially on M1 and M2. You just have to trust that Apple's going to release an update. If you're a Surface Book running Windows, you're going to trust that Microsoft's going to do the update.
What about my Lenovo Yoga that I've got at home?
It depends. Now we get into murky waters, right? We get into if they ask Microsoft nicely, Microsoft can push the update out over Windows Update.
It was especially telling in that this was allegedly stuff that was being developed for the Lenovo Yoga line.
Yes.
And I have a Lenovo Yoga. It's not.
This is the new. Alder Lake is 12th gen. So
it's not 12th gen. Yeah. It's 10th gen.
There's a different organization that'll keep your Lenovo updated.
Lenovo creates tools to do that.
Yeah, they do.
And
actually, can we? I'm sorry. I was going to say I'd love to go to Larry's number one story.
Oh, let's do it.
Oh, what was my number one story? Oh, yeah.
This is huge.
This has potential to be huge. However, I think that the document itself and what it's outlining for improving the cybersecurity of our current critical infrastructure and government cybersecurity requirements.
Hold on, let's say what the story is. So this was fact sheet. Biden-Harris administration delivers on strengthening America's cybersecurity. It reads to me like a list of like initiatives and things that they've done in this presidency.
Are doing or will be doing in the future.
Right. I just think on the surface, it's nice to see a commitment to that. It's nice to see initiatives. I mean, whether you agree with the initiatives or not, or we think that they have legs and will actually affect change.
In my opinion,
but they're doing stuff.
It will probably operate at the speed of government, which is to say very slow.
Sure.
Slugs on Quaalude.
That might be too fast, Josh.
Good point. I do want to point out that there's one piece in there that's interesting and actually very relevant today. The countering ransomware attacks to protect Americans online. One of the things they focus on is they're making it harder for criminals to move illicit money, to launder. So they're sanctioning a series of cryptocurrency mixers, used regularly by ransomware actors to collect and clean their illicit earnings. If you're not familiar with it, a cryptocurrency mixer is where I put in money, a Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. And let's say I put in 5 Ethereum. 20 other people each put in 5 Ethereum. We each get 4.8 back or so, but it's all mixed up. It's all broken up. I get 4.8, none of which was originally mine. I get different Ethereum coins back. All right.
Yep.
And the thought is that is actually a cleanser. It cleans the money because who's going to track and trace that money afterwards? In reality, they're idiots. Because what it does is it just makes more actors for the government to track and trace. Okay? But I digress. The reason that it's relevant now is that either today or yesterday, Tornado Cash, one of the mixers that they're talking about, got sanctioned few weeks ago, and they're actually suing OFAC, the Office of Financial, I forget what it is. They're the ones that sanction financial stuff. They're suing OFAC saying, it's just Americans wanting privacy. And I can literally almost see Nixon going, I am not a crook.
Oh, there you go.
Yep. So,
Larry, what do you think about the development of a new label to help Americans know their devices are secure?
This is where I
this is near and dear to your heart.
This is where I picked up on this article. And
well, hold on. Let's say what it is first. So,
yeah. All right. So effectively, they say this month we'll bring together companies, associations, and government partners to discuss the development of a label for Internet of Things devices so that Americans can easily recognize devices which meet the highest cybersecurity standards to protect against hacking and other cyber vulnerabilities. We're starting with some of the most common and often at-risk technologies, routers, and home cameras to deliver the most impact most quickly.
So Alibaba's going to be at the table in this meeting, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is Underwriters Laboratory for IoT, right? Are we basically hearing this correctly?
Basically.
And you know what?
Okay.
That is a fantastic idea.
Not the first time this has come up.
Cyber UL, right? I mean,
Cyber UL.
I mean, this is a fantastic idea.
We interviewed another woman about this initiative. She was part of this initiative as well. That's in the archives.
Yep. And
didn't Mudge's wife, actually, Sarah, who's an amazing mathematician and scientist in her own regard, was trying to build a cyber UL for software.
This was for actual IoT devices.
Yep. So definitely towards that. I'm optimistic.
You're skeptical.
I'm optimistic that it will do good. But like going to focus on routers and home cameras right out of the gate, like of the ones that I've torn apart, none of these cameras are going to be certified in the next 3 years.
No.
It was Carnegie Mellon, Lori Craner, PSW number 645, designing a usable security and privacy label for smart devices. If you're interested in this subject.
So one of the things that also terrifies me is that they say
most people don't go into a store and pick up a box and look at a label.
I mean, some of them are trained too because they think, it's Wi-Fi certified. Cool, it'll do Wi-Fi 6.
But like today was Prime Day. Most people aren't going in the physical store and picking up a label. So like Amazon has to implement a digital version of it. I mean, which is not impossible, but kind of interesting. And
part, some of the things that also kind of terrify me, and I'm looking for it, and I don't know if I can find it. Sorry, I'm still reading here. There was they say this month they're going to bring those folks together.
Yeah, like bring them together.
Great. Like if you think about like my experience with some of these types of things, and I'm looking for the actual link and what it was called, but I want to say 9 months ago, CISA put out MITRE put out basically a call to say, hey, we're looking for an IoT security advisory board for the federal government.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Please submit your application if you'd like to be on board.
Mm-hmm.
That was 9 months ago.
I know someone who's highly qualified for that.
I do too. and someone may have submitted their resume and application.
Did said person hear anything back?
And had glowing reviews from former government and military employees and members. And they queried whether that person wanted to serve on said advisory board, and the answer was an absolutely. And when followed up within the last month or so, the answer was, we haven't done anything yet. It's been 9 months.
Working at the speed of government.
Working at the speed of government.
So I did a quick search on IoT type security, and I found a reference to IoT cybersecurity standard being released to because the amount of IoT devices is becoming in the billions of dollars investment. Date August 2017.
This is not.
More recently, there was the Matter 1.0 smart home standard, which is starting small and working up, which is, I think, what they're pointing to here.
I mean, making it sound easy, like you just slap a label on it, but like that's not the hard part. The hard part is what's the validation process and how do you validate the validation process? In other words, how do I prevent manufacturers from China opening up an Amazon account and selling a whole bunch of gear, right? Or supplying the gear to someone with an Amazon store, which is, I think, pretty much the norm, right? My stuff comes from China. I don't know what they're putting. How do I validate the supply chain of that device so that I can stick this label on it, right? Or am I just forging the label? Like it's a really hard thing to validate.
Yeah. So and I did misspeak. It is the Internet of Things Advisory Board through the Department of Commerce and with NIST. And we have somebody that's near and dear to Rhode Island as the Secretary of Commerce, I might add. Former Governor Gina Raimondo.
Oh, it's awesome at getting things done.
So, but yep. So it's apparently being run and managed by NIST with interaction with.
But the certification, I think, needs to be from the manufacturer. Like,
so you got to self-certify?
No, Netgear needs to, much like PCI certification or an ISO certification, they need to go through the standard and say, yes, we're certified. All of our devices that we're bringing to market, we are certifying, and we've been certified by a certifying body, that we meet a minimum level of security, and therefore we can carry the stamp. You can't just like attach labels to the thing. Like there has to be an approved, almost like a global,
like the Wi-Fi certification through the Wi-Fi Alliance.
Yes, correct.
And you know, I'd get on a soapbox about how well the Wi-Fi Alliance has done with that.
Well,
because I won't, because we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today.
But why not? What's five?
Go down every other rabbit hole.
So, but my concern is that you get this. You get this certification and everything. I mean, we can do the certification of the Wi-Fi protocol implemented, but what happens when you find a 0-day for that Netgear router? It's still stickered?
Yeah, but I don't think it's a vulnerability scan necessarily, Lee, because like you have pointed out, I think it's, vulnerabilities can crop up. Yeah. I would say one of the requirements for certification should be a secure update process for the software on that device. So to your point, Lee, when there is a vulnerability, because we all know there is going to be a vulnerability, they have the ability to push out a firmware update, and then you have to figure out
an automatic firmware update process.
And for how long? Yeah. How long is that device going to be? I want to know how long I'm going to get firmware updates from. This is not a thing, because my MSI laptop that's sitting in front of me, last UEFI firmware update was 2020. And
I'd also,
there's nothing in sight to show that there's going to be anymore.
Yep, I agree. I think update process, the ability to opt out of those update processes depending on the type of device and those types of things.
Sure.
They probably should have a minimum standard pen test of some variety and evaluation of their operating system and how it's configured.
The problem, and I've thought about this, the problem becomes in this case, if I'm a large IoT device manufacturer, and what's my entire history of even supported devices? I have to maintain, if I'm going to test this update, right? Because I mean, sure, I could emulate it, and I'm sure there's ones that emulate it. Like if there's, at least there's a vulnerability, I need to issue a firmware update. I can't just write that software willy-nilly, produce a fix without testing it. I mean, I could, but that means people who install it on their routers might break their router. So to prevent that, I have to maintain all this test gear. And I think that's one reason why we see things that just go end of life and I'm not producing firmware for that, because then I got to test it and make sure it doesn't brick people's devices.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting challenge, that's for sure.
Yes.
Yep.
See, now I lose track of what we talked about, what we didn't. Oh, now is, I think, a good time to talk about BYOVD. It's not what you think, Larry. It's not what you think.
Bring your own Valentine's Day? What? Huh.
It burns. It burns.
Well, if you're bringing your own vulnerable driver, it might burn.
See, when Josh said it burns, I thought it might bring your own vodka drink. But
that's awesome. Bring your own vulnerable driver.
Okay. Don't mind if I do.
Don't mind if I do. And right now you can. So here's the thing. So Dan Gooden, who continues to do amazing work.
This is one of your stories, right, Paul?
Yeah, this is my story number 7. So Dan titles it, No Fix in Sight for Mile-Wide Loophole Plaguing a Key Windows Defense for Years. And like the plot thickens because he did an amazing job. So I was like, well, can't Microsoft fix this problem? It's not even vulnerable drivers. Like that's one class of drivers that could be problematic, but it's also drivers that are functioning, we talked about this last week, functioning as intended, but have really privileged, I mean, they're running in the kernel, so they all, but have code inside them to conduct highly privileged operations on your hardware. Mm-hmm. And attackers are using both, if vulnerable drivers isn't the full picture, it's a vulnerable driver or it's a driver that's being used maliciously that's legitimate. And so given the history, Dan says, you might think that Microsoft would have created a viable defense to stop the bring your own vulnerable driver, bring your own driver attacks. There's no evidence of that. Microsoft claims that Windows users can enable a feature that automatically blocks known vulnerable drivers, but I was unable to make it work on my ThinkPad running the latest version of Windows 10. Microsoft has no interest in helping me. That's what Dan claims. So Dan goes on to say, turning on the combination of memory integrity and hypervisor protected hypervisor protected code integrity will offer protection against BYOVD attacks.
That's what Microsoft says. Yep.
That's what Microsoft says. So Dan was working with a researcher
who enabled both.
What's that?
Who enabled both?
Enabled both on a system running Windows 10 Enterprise, and then attempted to load a vulnerable Dell driver that was using this attack by Lazarus, and the driver loaded just fine. So based on Microsoft's recommendation, they enabled hypervisor protected code integrity and memory integrity protection, and it still loaded the vulnerable driver. This was a Dell vulnerable driver from last year.
The drivers were signed. Of course they loaded them.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Getting to that.
I know you were.
Because why is a vulnerable driver still signed? Or what? I guess it would be signed forever, but why isn't anyway?
Because it wasn't. Because when it was signed, it wasn't vulnerable.
Correct. So why can't we get a block list, or better yet, a certificate revocation? But what I'm told is Microsoft doesn't, unless it's through Windows Update, they cannot revoke a driver or revoke a certificate for a driver. Because
if you did that, all the old stuff would quit working.
That's correct, Sam. That's why they don't do it. Because let's say it's not vulnerable. Let's just say it's a driver and it's old, and they don't want to support it anymore because it's only being used for malicious purposes, or mostly being used for malicious purposes. If they revoke that driver, like you said, Sam, anyone that needs that driver to do something, it won't work anymore.
But now the question is, and I don't know the answer to this because I haven't looked at the internals enough. Does it check the validity of the certificate for the driver every time it's used, or only on install?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because I think...
Wish I had asked that question earlier.
I bet that it is on install only, in which it checks the validity of the signature of the driver, and not on use. So that way, if they revoke the certificates, the existing drivers would probably still run. Would still work.
Right.
But also, then they revoke it. And then I can imagine what happens would be like half the other Windows things that I go to do, or even on my Mac, like, hey, you downloaded this from the internet. It could be insecure. And I'm not going to install this for you until you go over here and you go click and you go click and you click that and it installs. Like,
right.
Hey, this is a really old driver. Are you really sure you want to install this?
It's like, very similar with Secure Boot. So Secure Boot on Linux, if I try and run chipsec, which compiles and loads a dynamic kernel module, if I have Secure Boot enabled, Secure Boot goes, no, I can't, Dave, I can't do that, because now your your kernel signature is changing, and that module isn't signed. There's a lot more to it than that. It goes way deeper. For those listening and wanting to correct me on what I just said, I understand it goes a lot deeper, and I don't remember all the details about DKMS, but I know that when I try and load a kernel module with secure boots enabled, it goes and there was a point in time when this was introduced, and this is how it works. It goes today, and again, it depends on a number of things. When you get to more modern Linux distros today, if I'm loading a kernel module and I have secure boot enabled, it goes, hey, do you want to use your mock util or machine owner key capability to sign this driver, add something to the PKI certificate chain of trust for secure boot so that you can load this module? I go, yeah, I want to do that. It goes, cool. Give me a password. I'm going to reboot your computer. When I reboot your computer, you're going to have to enter that password, and then everything gets updated and you can load the kernel module. Did I get that right? I think so. That's how it worked.
Sounds good.
I've done that once or twice.
Sounds good.
Some of the details are a little wonky there. So someone please correct me.
Hey, before we get going too far, I want to hear some stories from our new hosts.
Yes. Well, I don't know that I was done with that one though.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Again,
sorry, I thought you were done.
My soapbox for drivers though is it gets weird, man. Like, how could Microsoft solve this problem, and how do you solve this problem? It's really because we're seeing more and more malware use either vulnerable drivers or drivers that are signed that allow them to conduct highly privileged, run highly privileged code or execute code in a highly privileged area that is circumventing a lot of protections. Even I believe a lot of EDRs might have trouble with this.
This is a back to that,
the thing
compiler cubed.
Yeah.
Josh's compiler.
Couldn't your EDR solution scan for a vulnerable driver and warn you, just like malware, saying this is a problem on your box and you need to fix it?
Sure.
I would assume so. I would assume so. Yeah. I don't know how all EDRs work, though. I don't pretend to know.
A lot of the newer EDRs work on open or load. They don't do the scanning anymore. That's old school. They're looking for behaviors when you start something up.
Right, but the driver would have to be loaded into the kernel. Again, I don't pretend to know how the Windows kernel works with drivers.
And then the question is, when does it get loaded in the kernel compared to when the EDR is?
Does it get loaded into the kernel before your EDR comes out? Was that your point, Larry?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. That's kind of where I was heading too.
Right.
Great minds think alike.
But since the use of this thing is to shut off the EDR, it seems like they have a logical reason to develop a defense against it.
Right. I want to know I want to know what defenses are out there for this. This is really intriguing to me. It's becoming more and more of an issue. Someone please write in and tell us if you've researched this area, and then we'll compare notes. How about that?
I like it.
Yeah.
I want to return to something from the previous story. In Discord, someone pointed out Germany already has this labeling of IoT devices working, and he sent me an example. The government accumulates vulnerabilities, and they put a QC code on the box, and you can scan that and go to the report, and it lists the vulnerabilities and such.
That's what Lori Craner was talking about doing for the U.S.
I mean, it's sort of like an S-bomb, but for hardware. It just tells you what's in the box and what vulnerabilities are associated with that box.
And if it's firmware based, does that make it an F-bomb?
I'm good with that. That works for me. Fucking
I just dropped an F-bomb on the show. Sorry.
Fuck, man.
Twice, actually.
Yes.
Oh, wait. We're not family friendly. Fuck it. Keep going.
That's another F-bomb.
Dropping F-bomb. Where's the hell's Jack?
Well, you don't want to drop your F-bomb because you want your F-bomb because you want that bill of materials for your firmware. You don't want to drop it. You want to preserve it.
You don't want to drop it. I don't have enough fucks left to get to drop them.
That's right.
Didn't you just talk about an F-bomb being the device throwing it up on top of the roof.
That is, I would call that also an F-bomb, like a firmware-based device that Bruce Potter did one. Remember, he was talking about he got a WRT54G and hacked it and wrapped it in bubble wrap and duct tape and threw it. And it was like a Wi-Fi bomb.
There was also the Wi-Fi deauth hand grenade, similar type of thing. Yeah, you take a router that's doing deauth and you toss it into
a hand
someplace.
grenade. He called it a hand grenade.
Yeah,
which I guess is just a small bomb. Good thing we're not in an airport. Don't listen to this in the airport.
So if that was a de-authentication bomb, would that be the bomb?
The bomb. It would be the bomb. Oh boy.
If we keep this up, I'm going to need the waiters.
Because the shit's getting deep in here.
That's right. All right. Who wants to talk about the next story? Someone else go.
I want to talk about the Sam story number 3.
Sam story
North
number
Korea.
3. North Korea's crypto hackers are paving the road to nuclear Armageddon.
Ruh-roh, George.
I think it's great. Come on. Yeah. We have a labor shortage. Why not utilize labor from other countries? I mean, it makes total sense.
Well, you don't have a shortage of criminals, though.
Well, they're labor.
Yeah, well, in this one, the North Koreans are applying for jobs at crypto companies, and even if they get the job, then they'll use it to hack the company, and they find exploits, but they stole about $1 billion in the first 5 months of 2022. So apparently the North Korean government and military is being primarily funded by theft of cryptocurrency now. Wow. Their previous criminal enterprises have shrunk during the pandemic, and this has replaced them.
Wow. Definitely a thing. For both funding a country, but also a thing that I think we hear more and more now, especially with remote work, are cyber criminals that are just applying for jobs. We've talked about this a little bit on the show, right? Essentially, they're applying for jobs. But we talked about it in a different light, like a scam. Like you are one person and you apply for, 3 or 4 jobs that you outsource those jobs to other people.
Someone's pretending to be me. That was one of my shows from about 2 weeks. One of my stories from about 2 weeks ago.
So we're seeing a lot of this. I mean, basically fraud. I mean, this is fraud. Yep. But also cyber criminal activity, as Sam, you pointed out, in that they are not just hacking the company, but they are stealing the cryptocurrency, this is the nature of the beast in cryptocurrency. I mean, it's kind of like a SWIFT transfer. Like once it's gone, it's gone.
Yes, and also it's incredibly bad software, and people throw incredible amounts of money into this stuff. I mean, I used to work in real finance, and this is just appalling that people take such poorly written software and throw all this money in it.
That's pretty much all software, Sam.
Sam, don't you understand? How else are you going to speed run through all of the scams of the 1800s and the 1900s if you don't have poorly written software? What's wrong with you, man?
Well, that's true. It's the same old pressure, first to market. Everybody figures I'm just going to buy it and get rich before it gets hacked.
In that vein, is most software poorly written?
I mean,
not like this stuff, I think.
There is levels. There is levels, Sam. Agreed. I mean, at least the code I read is poorly written.
And the whole point of it is to be so complicated that nobody can understand it, and therefore they invest figuring you must be a genius.
That's a strategy.
Oh, okay. So I actually compared white papers once. You know how every coin at one point had its own white paper, and every DeFi, decentralized finance, had its own white paper on why they were super special, super secret stuff. I literally found that significant numbers of white papers were simply just copies of other people's white papers.
Oh, yeah.
And there was at least one I found that they just literally ripped pages from different white. They didn't even match. Like you could read from one page to the next and be like, what?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I researched Lisk the day before it launched, and it was supposed to be the number 3 cryptocurrency, and the links to download the software didn't work, and the links to the documentation didn't work, and it was launching tomorrow. And when it launched, it got hacked instantly, so an automatically generated headline came out and says, Lisk falls 100.00% on first day of trading.
Yeah, there's a lot of that fraud, too, where people are just creating basically fake cryptocurrency, getting a bunch of money to start it and stealing the money.
This one
I heard
still
that somewhere. That was a podcast I listened to somewhere.
the Lisk is still around and it still has an enthusiastic community. So apparently it persisted, but it launched very badly.
Yeah, but there's some podcast did a thing on that. I forget if it was Hacked or Darknet talked about a specific case where it might have been multiple cases of the same people, like basically doing this, basically scamming investors, right? Interesting.
Okay. Hey, Mandy, your story number 2.
That's where I was going to go to.
Great minds think alike.
I like. This is a fun one.
About the roller coaster rides?
Yeah.
Oh, I love this one.
I thought this was very interesting to see how. So apparently, there's now multiple reports that Apple iWatches and certain iPhones are triggering emergency calls whenever they're on roller coasters. And it comes because the newest versions of the devices are able to detect whenever sudden impact is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then they automatically start alerting the next of kin or the emergency services. So apparently this is happening around Dollywood and several other places in the country, that people's family members and 911 are being notified that people are dying in these crashes and they're just on a roller coaster.
Or at least have been involved in potentially a collision or some accident or something of the like.
Right.
But
so it automatically makes the call unless you turn it off.
Yep. It's kind of like on
turn the feature off or stop the call. It looks like you've got an SOS that you can slide.
I don't believe you can turn the feature off.
You can turn the feature off, but if you have the feature on and you're on a roller coaster and your phone's in your pocket, it calls emergency services unless you slide the thing to say
don't call.
Don't call, or is the slide the thing? I'm looking at a screen image. The slide the thing is to make the call.
The one that you probably see is probably the generic. I pressed the power button too many times.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I see what you're saying.
You can put the thing in airplane mode. That'll stop it from doing it.
And Google has this in pixels, and it says here, Google's crash detection system allows the user to provide feedback on what just happened in the event. Like, hey, I'm okay. I wasn't in a crash. Like, I dropped my phone, or I was playing football and I had my phone in my pocket.
I dropped my phone. Oh man.
Oh, I know. Don't do that.
I wish my
new Pixel gets here tomorrow. I'm really excited.
Yeah, Mandy, I wish I had heard about this before, because I can think of a ride that I might want to test this on, because we're headed to Disney next week, and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad right at the end. There is a very abrupt stop before you come into the station, and
the Apple Watch has this too. I took a walk in a very hot temperature, and it kept buzzing and offering to call 911. Thinking I was dying of a heart attack or something.
Oh my god!
Wow.
I just got my new Apple Watch. I'm going to be having fun with this sucker.
My new Google Watch comes in tomorrow too. I get the watch and the phone, and the Pixel Buds. I splurged.
Fanboy.
I'm a fan. I fanboyed it, and I bought everything. The Pixel Buds Pro doesn't get great reviews though, so that might be going back.
And especially where you're more of an audiophile on the headphone side. That
I was looking at just for calls, but they were like the microphone is kind of bad for call. But a lot of the reviews were pre-reviews, and they've released some firmware updates to fix the problem, which is really actually funny, given what you and I both do work in firmware and IoT and stuff. So I'm like, I need my firmware updates for my Pixel Buds, and we'll see what happens there. So
Paul, the Shure IEMs in-ear monitors come with a Bluetooth piece, so you could use those. They're actually pretty good quality.
Yeah, I think there's definitely better. I wanted to see what happens if I was all in on the Google ecosystem, if things would be better. We'll see. I think a pretty quick one. It was a long article, but my story number 4 was kind of interesting. So there's articles that you get to read that are previous research that you should read first, and then read this article number 4, which is titled "A Hidden DNS Resolver Insecurity Creates a Widespread Website Hijack Risk." And basically, after reading all of it, I can sum it up as this. It's a Kaminsky attack on a closed resolver using an email server as the attack vector. That's all it is. I send email to an email server with a special domain, that I own the resolver to that domain. Yep. That email server goes to an internal, what they call a closed resolver. I think we would call that a caching name server or recursive. Thank you. Recursive name server that's only on the internal network. So it goes to that server. That server goes, oh, I got to go out to the internet to get that answer. And you Kaminsky attack that one because it's using static source ports. So you can send your response back on the source port it was expecting. And then there's also a DNS ID, and they go into that as well. And basically cache poison from that point. So it's essentially the Kaminsky attack, but through an email server against an internal resolver, which I thought was cool. Don't get me wrong, I think it's cool, but that I'll save you from reading the whole thing.
Okay. How about a story from Lee?
Sure.
Man, I'd like to do one.
Yes. Oh, and they have tools to check for this. DNS Reset Checker and DNS Analysis Server. SEC Consult is the company that did it. So if you're going to check out the article, definitely check out those tools and check your DNS servers if you still have DNS servers that you maintain, which I'm sure people do in any case.
Yeah.
Lee.
So I don't know, I was trying to think of which ones I was the most fond of.
Let's do fun. I like fun.
Well, the one that was kind of weird to me was this a dark website that like just dumped 1.2 million credit cards to get credibility so they could build a future set of customers.
Yeah, like who still steals credit cards online? I thought that's like sold like 2005.
Yep.
Ish.
I know. I mean, it felt like first hit's free, but then I'm like, yeah, is this really a thing anymore? So weird.
Apparently.
I think if you're 15 years old, if you're 20 years old, and now you get that access, heck yeah.
I mean, yeah, you know what? You're not wrong. No, it's like now I can go use those credit cards and sign up for a bunch of websites that require payment.
I mean, maybe it's safer than being a holder or a plug in a SIM swapping attack, as we talked about that kid that got.
Yep.
So maybe they're like, maybe I should go back to credit cards. It's a little safer.
Yeah, I mean, heck, not even getting credit cards, like just getting access to 1.2 million credit cards.
Sure.
Like, yeah.
Might make it easier to pay for those hundreds of domains you're holding on to.
Yep.
Did I say that out loud? No.
Hey, wait, what? Hundreds of domains? Have you been looking at my GoDaddy interface? Stop it.
No. I would never do that. But an interesting one, another one though, I put on here just to have a conversation about a little bit is, that the latest Exchange vulnerability where they keep updating the mitigation and there's no actual patch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was confused about. So is this? I think we were talking about this earlier today. Is this the same Exchange? Like, do we need a whole podcast dedicated to Microsoft Exchange O-Day exploits?
You could theoretically do one.
There's a lot there.
It just keeps giving, and they keep refining it. I mean, the latest refinement was really it made me think of Josh because it's a regex update to their in the IIS manager for blocking exploits. And when they first started, they had a set of advice, and they came out with some PowerShell scripts, and they came out with fixed PowerShell scripts, and they come up with this one. I mean, you look at the advice. There's like 6 or 8 updates to their blog,
but no patch. They don't have an actual patch.
Nope,
it's not patch Tuesday
no actual
yet.
patch yet.
Well, because no one wants to patch Exchange. I mean, even if there is a patch, who the fuck wants to do that?
Yeah,
like, not me.
You get it.
Not it.
You get it about once every 6 months if you're lucky.
Yeah, and even folks with 365 are still likely having on-prem Exchange for some of the integration features between Azure AD, and it feels like a vicious circle. If get the hell out of the on-prem Exchange business, guys.
Yeah, none of this stuff is easy though. Just
no,
like we said, patching Exchange or migrating away from Exchange. None of it's easy. I think.
Oh hell no!
What are you going to migrate to?
A A lot of
Postgres.
Raise your hand if you've been involved in a technology migration that went sideways at least once. Like this.
Can I raise like
only
both,
once?
both hands?
I don't have enough.
Everyone's in the Discord like raising their hands. Yes.
I don't have enough hands. Right.
I don't have enough hands. There was a lot of.
Don't raise that, Larry.
No, it's not a hand. I can't. No, I don't have enough hands.
Right. Raise a hand if you had a technology migration that went south that caused you to be locked in a room by guys with guns.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Raise your hand if you've had a technology upgrade that's gone south because of your own doing. I don't have enough hands. Or your own undoing, as the case may be. Classic example I had was, we're swapping that switch. You got to unplug it, and then you got to plug this one in because we don't have enough power outlets. Okay, make sure you unplug the right one. Brrr. Oh, shit, that was the wrong one.
Or like my favorite, which I never do, right, is I run commands, and then I'm like, oh, I think that's going really well. And then I'm like, shit, that was the wrong system.
Whoops.
Damn it, where are my backup tapes?
Mm-hmm.
I did that the other day. I'm like,
oh no,
I just updated the wrong system. I'm like, and rebooted it. Damn it. Oops. Well, fortunately, I don't maintain a whole lot of production systems today.
Yeah, and hopefully updates are good for that. Like,
yeah, and it was ultimately just unexpected outages. Most of my own stuff, maybe some stuff here in the studio, but
you'd never do that.
But I think a good segue to that is VMware vCenter server bug disclosed last year is still not patched. So I think we're seeing a trend here, Lee, right, where vendors are not releasing patches in promoting workarounds, and the workarounds are friggin' painful. Like, this sounds painful for this VMware vCenter bug. We talked about vCenter last week. It says to block attempts, VMware advises admins to switch to Active Directory over LDAP's authentication.
Yep. Secure LDAP.
Or it's a small S though, which I thought was weird. Is that how they do LDAP S as either
secure? My understanding is either one. It's LDAP -S, capital S, or a small s.
I gotcha. So Active Directory over LDAP small s authentication, or Identity Provider Federation for ADFS, vSphere 7 only, from the impacted integrated Windows authentication. That sounds horrible, by the way. That just sounds like it sounds like a technology migration ready to go wrong, which we all just admitted happens, like a lot.
Yes. So basically, they're saying instead of using native AD integration, you're going to use an IDP or LDAP, federated authenticator like ADFS. But there's others. So you're basically switching your tech stack.
Just make that happen for me, Lee. That's no big deal, right? Like, you can get that implemented for me tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Well, you know how to spell SAML, right? I didn't say it was risky.
Deal. We can do that in 24 hours. It's good, right?
What about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we might have it working in 48.
Right.
Days.
Months.
Yeah.
Months.
Well, in the test lab, it's going to work in 30 seconds, and we can repeat it. But when it comes to production,
I'm
going to say an old saying.
To the help desk. Many calls to the help desk.
In theory,
I'm wondering what kind of alcohol can be delivered.
Right. In theory and practice are the same. Very good job.
In practice, not so much.
Many calls to the help desk, I see. Yes.
I am just fearful.
Long is the queue.
Now we're seeing two different vendors in very widely deployed software that are not getting patches, that are recommending workarounds, that are a lot of work. I mean, that means there's going to be a lot of unpatched vCenter and Exchange floating around out there for a while.
Yeah. Did you catch this thing it said in the article you linked that they had retracted the patches 11 days later because they couldn't not only did they not remediate it, but they caused their token service to crash during patching.
That's like the double whammy. Like, you broke stuff with the patch and
it
you
doesn't
didn't
fix
patch
anything.
the actual vulnerability. It doesn't fix anything. It's gross.
No. Oops.
I am very
You
concerned.
can't even click the I applied the broken patch button.
Yeah. I am very concerned for VMware customers based on our recent conversations.
Yeah.
And there are still a lot of people running VMware.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, we just, lift and shift to the cloud. No, that is not how it works. That is a technology migration, which we, again, have identified can go very, very wrong.
In theory or practice.
Right.
In theory
or practice.
Yeah.
In practice of theory.
Yes. or in theory of practice. Right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Paul, can I grab one here?
Yes, please do.
My story number 2. To me is...
Larry, take a number 2.
All sorts of fun. Number 1, I ordered to take a number 2.
Right.
Number 2, no. Seems all sorts of weird for a number of reasons.
Oh, this is the Halloween hack.
Yes, because one, what is one of the largest retailers of Zigbee-enabled devices right about now? And it's Ikea. It's one of the largest.
No way.
Yeah, one of the largest.
I'm a big fan of Philips Hue, but I feel like I feel like the price point prevented it from really catching on. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say IKEA smart bulbs are probably cheaper, but you have to put them together yourself. Like lots of pieces. They come with horrible instructions.
They come with an Allen wrench. Yeah. No, and honestly, I haven't had a chance to play with any of their smart home stuff, but like huge retailer that has their own smart home line. One, I think that's weird.
I'm sure
that
the supply chain for that is totally secure, by the way.
Probably.
Right, Josh?
Probably. Either the F-bombs or the S-bombs.
F-bomb. They definitely have an F-bomb.
Yep.
Well,
let me put it this way. I'll be dropping F-bombs all day. I actually just put together our laundry room cabinets with IKEA stuff. And we're going around IKEA and I'm going, I don't recognize the brand on that smart bulb. So I'm literally in IKEA looking stuff up. And I'm like, oh, this is bad.
Yep.
This is just bad.
We haven't even gotten to the attack yet, and I'm just talking about what's weird. And then the other one that I think is weird is that, like, can you imagine working in the IT security, the customer-facing IT security department at IKEA? Like, hey, I'm the security engineer for IKEA's home products. It just seems weird to me. Like,
is there such a division?
I would assume so, because they've got security products, and there was a vulnerability found, and they reported it, and they're addressing it. So there's got to be somebody that does that.
Well, it's not a security product. It's security of a product.
Security problem.
Yeah, security problem. Yeah.
So that security problem, I think, is arguably just the tip of the iceberg.
What is the security problem?
So some researchers at Synopsys Security Research Center did some fuzzing of IKEA's trad-free bulbs and their gateway.
So it works like Hue. You need a gateway that talks Zigbee and or Z-Wave, but
this is all Zigbee. This is all Zigbee. Yep.
It's all Zigbee.
And arguably, IKEA has been pretty open about their protocol, about how you can interact with it, so you can build your own interactions and those types of things. It's
a protocol on. I mean, Zigbee is a protocol, but they have a protocol on top that runs over.
You deliver some data methods, and those data methods are interpreted in particular ways.
I feel like you spent a lot of time with Zigbee and associated protocols and devices.
Still do. But effectively, they've just got the system. The research ended up being some fuzzing against both the bridge and the bulbs.
Yep.
And they found that doing some fuzzing about that data that was being sent to the bulb to trigger commands could actually cause a bulb to flash. And when sent repeatedly and repeated flashing, the Halloween attack would cause the bulbs to allow for remote code execution. So some buffer overflows. So you're sending the on-off command effectively so many times that you got a buffer overflow. Remote code execution, which then they could exploit the bulb.
Effective range for Zigbee in this scenario?
100 meters. Unless it's in a mesh, and then every node is potentially 100
Potentially
meters.
A repeater for your attack.
Yes. So
interesting.
Some differences, some distance. Now, you start tying this with some additional potential attacks. Eyal, Shamir, and Ronan, yes, that's Shamir of the S in RSA, talked about many years ago about a wormable Zigbee deliverable attack delivered by a drone.
Interesting.
Tying some story.
I remember that. I was going to say that. Yes, I remember that.
Yes. Tying our drone story earlier, right?
Tying into a drone. You get a drone, and What do you need to transmit Zigbee and SDR, software-defined radio?
You can do that with a CC2531, which with some reprogrammed firmware. Mm-hmm. Those are about $12 on Amazon, and the programmer's $20.
So it's a
Dragorn built something for that, didn't he?
Yeah, it's old. It's old and
microcontroller that runs code that can talk Zigbee. That has a radio component to it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's a development kit. You can get the development kits with external antennas, so you can increase your range. Those are about $20.
Very cheap.
Very cheap, and you run that on like a single board computer, like a Raspberry Pi.
It's a hat on a Raspberry Pi.
Nope, it's a USB device.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And you attach that to a drone, and you can fly it and make people's lights flicker through your whole neighborhood.
You make your lights flicker, then you exploit the bulb, and you get remote code execution on the bulb. So you do that with a drone. That was the EL Ronan and Shamir attack.
Yep.
That they surmised for something wormable.
You also find some kind of wireless signal to talk to any kind of smart speakers in their house and play screams while the lights are flickering on and off. Yeah.
There's another attack that was against some Hue stuff known as the Philips Hue chained attack.
I remember this.
In that they did similar types of attacks where they exploited the bulb and then they put backdoored firmware on the bulb because they had a remote code execution.
I remember this research. We covered it on the show. I forget who did it, though.
I don't remember either.
ESET. It was a research from a pretty large company.
I can figure it out pretty quick here. Now that you have your own firmware on the bulb, it's not joined to the network, so they join you as a user. You're like, why is this bulb purple? It should be green.
Right.
And they can't control it because the bulb's no longer connected to the network because of the new firmware. Mm-hmm. So you re-add the bulb to your network. And when it re-adds the bulb to the network, it gets network keys. And now you have keys.
You've backdoored the firmware to steal the keys. That's awesome.
Which you can then now start, because you have the keys, you can start fuzzing the application layer effectively to the bridge. And in the case of the Philips Hue chained attack, they were able to get remote code execution on the bridge, which is connected to your Ethernet or Wi-Fi network.
Which talks to the cloud, which talks to your phone.
Which has access to your local network, which you may be able to get NetNTLM hashes for your remote workers' workstations on those home networks to recover credentials.
That's really interesting.
To get credentials to join the enterprise Wi-Fi network that you deploy an attack surface via drone.
Oh God! Now I want to.
Shit. But as long as the gear that I'm carrying by the drone weighs under 5 kilos, we're good to go.
Yep.
Okay.
5 kilos.
Yeah. So this attack this week with those stories is mind blowing. Thanks, Ikea.
It's really cool.
Oh, totally. And allegedly super simple. I spent a bunch of time digging into this. The only references I can find to the CVEs are at Synopsys's website, where they have a very short blog about what they did. There's no code available. There's nothing in their GitHub repository. I can't even find the CVE listed on any of the NVD and all those sites. Yeah.
That makes it hard to really understand this and conduct further research. You know what I mean? Like, I get in some circumstances you don't want to release the code. Like, sometimes I theorize if I were to find some widely available firmware and I was able to interact with it in a certain way that let me overwrite regions of the spy flash it was running on, and you could air quotes brick a device, because there's different levels of bricking.
Sure.
There's bricking that is like truly bricked, like the device is unusable. But there's bricking where you can recover it. It's going to require either some soldering or a clip to a chip,
or some other fallback, or something like back to the bootloader to have it load new firmware via the bootloader.
And the other thing with that is, do I as a user have access to all the right software and code or config or the full spy flash, right? Because typically I get delivered a device, let's say, and there's firmware on the spy flash chip, and company gives me an update, but that update is just for like one region. It's not the full all of the regions on the spy flash, for example, right? Like, it's not U-Boot Larry, it's not NVRAM, It's just like a code update, basically. But if that device is like bricked, air quotes, I may not have all the software or data that I need to like reflash that whole image, which is my concern. Sometimes. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in the case of an Ikea bulb, like, not a huge deal.
Right.
If it's your PC, laptop, or server, it could be a different story, right?
No, I mean, those. If I was catching the right search, those Ikea bulbs are priced at like $12 to $15 a piece, which is way good.
Way cheaper than
pricing.
Philips. Yeah, way cheaper than Philips Hue.
Yep. Oh,
yeah,
definitely.
or Nanoleaf. Actually, the Nanoleaf bulbs are down to like $10 each.
There's a lot of them now. I mean, I'm old school. I adopted the smart home. We
Yep.
talk about
From
Philips Hue. That's been around for a long time.
The Philips Hue is a smart home because there was another one, Smart Things.
Smart Things, which got bought by Samsung.
I think they're gone.
Samsung put that in the toilet.
Yep.
Now you just got to roll your own smart home from open source software. There's a Linux open source one.
Yeah.
So I can't think of what it's called.
So I've done a bunch of them, and a lot of them are low end, and like I went down the Philips Hue route, and I have a couple of the Philips Hue stuff, and they're wicked expensive. And they fail.
Yeah.
By the way.
Yep.
My experience as I've accumulated more Philips Hue stuff is it's wicked expensive, and then you deploy it for 6 months, and it just stops working.
Seriously, the Nanoleaf, especially if the Nanoleaf bulbs are only like $10 each. So the light bulbs, not the hexagon panels and all that stuff.
Yep. So Philips has another line of bulbs that is not the Hue, but it's a lower. They acquired someone, and they instead of integrating their technology, they left it as a quote lower end option to get into the ecosystem. And it's the Wiz line, W-I-Z.
I think I've seen that. Yeah,
I have a bunch of those at home, and again, I think I probably have 20 of the Wiz bulbs at home, and one circuit in my kitchen is batshit crazy. Like the living room lights, you turn them on and they all work great. The kitchen ones you turn on, and like 3 days a week, one of the overhead pot lights doesn't turn on. So you turn it off and you turn it back on again. And then 3 of them are blue. The center one's not on, and the other 2 are white.
Yeah, that's what I found. The lower end
and then
stuff,
turn it off and turn it back on again, and they're all white. And the center one is on, but that one in the corner isn't on now. So you're literally turning the light on and off like 6 times.
You're just essentially rebooting it into submission.
Seriously. And quite honestly, they say, yeah, if you have a problem with the bulb, you just need to reboot it, and you'd reboot it by like switching flicking the switch 5 times in relatively rapid succession. That's effectively what I'm doing every day. But it's only in that one room.
No, it sounds like you're having a low-cost suburban rave there.
I am. And it's before coffee, so it's no fun. Let me put it that way.
Light switch rave.
Yep.
Yeah.
And clearly he has a very patient family to put up with that.
Yes.
Well, they know by now. I mean, Larry and I both, I think, I'll speak for Larry and I, adopted the smart home stuff long ago because we were into the embedded stuff early, and we were like, oh, what's all this new IoT stuff coming out? Well, if I'm going to test it for security, like I got to know how it works, so let's implement it in my home because why not?
Yeah.
And then we're like, wow, it's really vulnerable. And then I end up with like all this crufty stuff in my house that I have to replace. I'm like, yeah, I bought that because I wanted to see how bad the security was on it and see how it worked. And yeah, it's pretty terrible. And now.
And did you even get to have meatballs whenever you bought those bulbs?
Well, duh.
I mean, I would have been
Go to
surprised.
Ikea. What else do you go for but the meatballs? Let's be honest.
I mean, the meatballs go in my crock pot, which also has Wi-Fi. No, I'm just.
I mean,
some crock pots do have Wi-Fi. Mine does not.
I mean, I'm bitter. We bought some at the beginning of the pandemic. We bought some stuff from Ikea for home delivery because you couldn't go to the stores. We needed this thing, and it was a bunk bed for our youngest's room. And we couldn't go and get it because the stores were all closed, but they were doing delivery, and they would leave it on your front porch. And I ordered a $500 bunk bed and $2.50 spatulas. I didn't get my fucking spatulas.
Did you get the bunk bed?
I got the bunk bed, but I didn't get my effing spatulas. And the sad part is, you're old when
You really are upset about spatulas.
You have a favorite spatula.
Yes.
And
Yes.
those were my favorite spatulas.
It's like my tongs. My tong.
Yep.
I have like my favorite set.
Actually, I'm going to modify that slightly. Larry, you know you're old when you have a favorite spatula in the kitchen.
And a favorite spatula for the grill.
I know where he was going, and a favorite spatula for the bedroom.
I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about.
The Aunt Jemima treatment lives on.
Oh, no.
So
I know. So I want to talk about my story number 10. The 0-day dilemma. And it's interesting. The article goes into a lot of different things, but I think I really like this insight. I think I really like it. So the author says, to sum it up, the problem of the 0-day attack has not been solved because every approach depends on knowledge of events that have happened in the past, whether it's known malware or known normal network application behavior that serves as a benchmark for spotting malware-caused anomalies. It's like, well, that's really, like, of all the articles I read and all this, like, quotes I could have pulled out, I'm like, that was pretty deep. Like, I think that's really interesting that we have the 0-day problem because our current security methodologies rely on like knowing what malware looks like, knowing what's normal, and knowing what vulnerabilities and exploits exist out there. And we can't defend against 0 days because we don't know what that's going to look like. Mm-hmm. Josh, you're raising your hand.
He's got to go.
Bye.
You got to go. I was hoping you weigh in on that. Okay. Love you, man. Bye.
Talk later.
So I thought that was deep.
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of like Josh's spatula in the bedroom. Not like that. Not like that.
No.
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 No, you're right. You're right. It's not like that at all.
So yeah, that was deep thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really good insight. The more I think about it, the more I think it was really good.
Mm-hmm.
Detecting the unknown. The unknown knowns. The known unknown. I don't pretend to have a solution to that problem, but I do think we're too heavily weighted on knowing what malware is. We've got a signature for this malware. We've got even a behavior for this malware. We know that's what malware looks like, but the whole point of a 0 day is it could be a behavior in an application. You don't know what it's going to look like yet. How do we detect that?
Yeah.
Are you wanting Minority Report?
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's what we're... But like I also think, like when we talk about vulnerable drivers and lower level attacks, right? Things in the kernel, things in your bootloader, things in firmware, in specifically like also supply chain attacks, right? Like someone's going to the hardest one is someone's going to use legitimate software to do something malicious. How do we detect that? And I think we rely on detecting those behaviors because it's really hard to know that if I've got software on my system, if it's going to do something malicious or not, or when it does, I can't really fingerprint that it's been backdoored. Maybe it has been backdoored, and how do I know? Like I can't, like if it was the SolarWinds attack, as an example, they put a backdoor in legitimate software.
Yep.
Right? Like I see the update come down for that software and I'm like, okay, it's a signed update. I was expecting an update from SolarWinds. It installed more software. How do I detect whether that update or that change is legitimate or not? I don't until I observe the behavior. And I think what the author is saying in this article is like, if I don't know what that behavior is going to be, how do I look for it in my network? I think it's a really interesting, I think it's one of the pinnacle problems that we need to solve that's not very easily solved because again we don't know what that's going to look like.
Well, that's where the supposed easy answer is you've got to know what normal is so you can detect abnormal. Of course, that if we had that, we've been talking about that for a long time, right?
I think if we could do that, we wouldn't have any breaches anymore. Right? Like,
because
if
clearly
I think
it's
on
a
a grand
trivial.
scale, if you could do that like on a human body, then you wouldn't have cancer.
Right.
Right.
I mean, we would all love to be able to have complete foresight of every thing, and I don't think that's just because of a breach or 0-day situation.
No, and I was thinking, while that's the impossible dream, can we raise the bar a little bit? Can we get so that we notice stuff that doesn't feel quite so normal more easily? Because if we're just looking for this particular action, we're going to fail, right? We're going to miss all the other actions that should be we looking at.
I think there's so much change in the software on your system that it's difficult to detect if that change could potentially even be malicious or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing we struggle with. So we rely on like further in the attack chain, if you will, it doing something that we can observe as malicious. But by then it's almost too late, right? So my whole thing is like, how do we get earlier in the process and know that if software's change, was that a good change or was it a bad change? And it's like a really difficult thing to detect. We think of software composition analysis, but oftentimes that relies on vulnerabilities. So my whole thing I've been thinking about lately is like, when we talk about supply chain security, the difference between Log4j and SolarWinds, right? Log4j is a vulnerability. That's, I think, much easier to detect potentially because there's a pattern to a vulnerability, right? There's something we can detect in a vulnerability. But when it's legitimate software and it's just a slight behavior modification, how do I know if that's a legitimate modification or a malicious modification? Determining the difference between the two. There's an idea for a startup in here somewhere, right? Any other stories? Let's see. Did we go through all of mine, yours? We talked about that. Oh, Fortinet. This is really bad. So basically, Fortinet has issued a release. It's like basically we've got a really bad authentication bypass in our software. Who found this? So Fortinet released an advisory, said there's an authentication bypass, could allow unauthenticated attackers to perform operations on the administrative interface via our favorite specially crafted HTTP or HTTPS requests.
Specially crafted. Hey, Paul, grab me an ice cube.
Absolutely.
Please and thank you.
So I forget where I pulled this from. It was like a link to who did the actual research on this one. They're going to release the details soon. FortiGuard's advisory. I want to say I pulled this from another resource on this particular one that I can't find. I forget who did the actual research. It might have been Horizon 3 or whatever. We talked about them last week. But anyway, if you can exploit this vulnerability, modify the admin user's SSH key to enable the attacker to log into a compromised system. You can add new local users, update network configurations, download the system configuration, initiate packet captures to capture otherwise sensitive information. This is essentially like exposing the web interface to your Fortinet device with no password or authentication.
That's not good.
It's just hanging out there like a website.
That's not good.
That's how I read it. And again, I pulled this from an actual write-up of
in bad form, the register doesn't quote the original stuff,
which means I found
wait a minute.
I didn't add it.
Wait a minute. And the CVE is crap because it's only reserved. It's not
actually. Who did this research?
Yeah, it's only been identified.
It was Horizon3.ai.
Oh, was it?
Doing great research. Yeah. October 11th.
So yesterday.
Yeah. So look at Horizon3.ai. Look at their blog. And they are going to releasing a technical deep dive and proof of concept for the CVE later this week. So find out exactly what the vulnerability is by the end of this week. This was published on October 11th.
So this brings other failures to mind that aside from the Fortinet technical stuff, there's been an assigned CVE, but you can't even tell what it is, but people are referencing the CVE to the issues.
Yep. When there's no details. So we don't know what the authentication bypass is. We know that if you read the Horizon 3, like all the way down the bottom.
The point was like the Register article that you linked to says, hey, there's a thing that bad things can happen, and there's a CVE identified.
So it sounds to me like their API endpoint. So it says the collection API/API/v2 endpoints can be used to configure the system and modify the administrator user. So it sounds like it was an API abuse that essentially gave them access to potentially every call or function within the API, which is essentially like just giving the attacker access to the administrative interface for this device. And I'm not knocking Fortinet. Like, everyone has vulnerabilities, right? I think what we're picking on, Larry, back to your point, is like, we don't know what the actual exploitation is. The CVEs like are reserved, but they're not really updated. And so all we have to go on is what the FortiGuard advisory is. And FortiGuard, is basically saying, don't expose your web management interface to the internet, which is right. I mean, not horrible advice, but not super helpful either.
Well, actually, I mean, the FortiGuard thing says, you can either lock down your interface or apply the firmware upgrade. And I'm going, no. Today's, with everything that's going on, so many interfaces are being exploited because unauthorized device you got to lock down access to your admin interfaces. You're not going to turn them off. That's silly. And then go ahead and patch. Just like this is one in a long list in the last couple of years of, access the admin interface, have your wicked way, because you've exposed that to whatever size, whether it's on the internet or intranet. You still need to limit it. What it'll talk to.
CIS's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog was updated this week to include CVE 2022-4684, which is this specific vulnerability.
Gotcha.
So this means like not only is there a vulnerability here, but it's gotten all the way to CISA to go, we actually see this being exploited in the wild.
Yeah, well, the article, the Register article said, that they had seen it being exploited in the wild.
Yeah,
and
so CISA made an update.
The part that drives me nuts is that, like, now CISA has included this to the CVE, which has absolutely no information about it, because it's only reserved because it hasn't been confirmed yet. And the Register has this article describing this stuff, but doesn't say who the original researchers were.
You have to Google for that and find that it's Horizon 3 AI.
Good reporting. Shouldn't make me need to Google for who the researchers were.
No, I agree. They could have done much better research. I mean,
they did the research because clearly they didn't look it up by CVE.
Right.
Right. They knew
they
something.
are the originators of the CVE. Yeah. They'll be credited in the CVE.
Yeah.
Why isn't the CVE listed with a link to Horizon 3 AI's website?
Because the CVE... Oh, so in the Register article,
Yeah, well, even in the CVE itself, why aren't they...
Because the CVE hasn't yet to be confirmed. It's only reserved for that particular vulnerability.
Confirmed, it's being exploited in the wild, according to CISA. Clearly, like, our wires are not all connected in the right ways here.
Clearly.
What
we have here
is a failure to communicate.
Because
at least as a Fortinet customer, I want the information that's at least posted as of October 11th by Horizon 3 to say, like, it gives you more information. Like, basically, it's an API endpoint, and it gives attackers full access. Like, it describes the impact, right? And also the effects of this vulnerability, which I think everyone should know. So why isn't it all out there, to your point, Larry? Should all be out there. It's all out there, but you got to go find it. That's not cool. Yep.
All right.
Oh, last one. A thermal attack can crack passwords in just a few seconds.
A what now?
Did you see this?
No.
Second and last one. Mandy's holding up her finger too. She's still got stuff to talk about. I like to see how far long I can do the segment before we all get tired. How much more bourbon can we consume and still be able to do a segment? How much more of that mini moonshine thing can Mandy? Did you see this story, Mandy? Is that what you're muted, Mandy? I can't hear you.
Damn it. Technology.
Yeah, that was great content. I was just saying, but no, we have to keep going here. I'm not done.
Right. Thank you.
With the mini moonshine, I might add.
That too, and with stories. So Thermal attacks can occur after users type their passcode on a computer keyboard, smartphone screen, or ATM keypad before leaving a device unguarded. A passerby equipped with a thermal camera can take a picture that reveals the heat signature of where their fingers have touched to the device. The brighter, I feel like I've seen this in a movie.
You have. And you've probably seen this in some real-world attacks. I want to say right about the time FLIR imaging cameras were became more mainstream, and everybody could get a hold of one for $500 or $600.
The brighter an area appears in the thermal image,
the hotter
the
it is,
more recently
the last
it was
number.
touched. By measuring the relative intensity of the warmer areas, it's possible to determine the specific letters, numbers, or symbols to make up the password and estimate the order. That's interesting. Estimate the order in which they were used based on their heat signature. So it's not just the user. Like we've all done this on a keypad, and we see which
numbers are worn out.
If it's a numeric keypad, which numbers are worn out the most, and then how many combinations of that. And let's try it. Thermal imaging estimates an order, which basically reduces your data set that you need to fuzz.
And when we saw this, originally, I think
fuzz is the wrong word.
It was against physical door locks, same thing.
Brute force guess would be the accurate term here.
Yeah,
brute force.
Educated
guess.
Brute force.
It reduces your
key space.
Key space. Thank you. Key space is the term to brute force guess the password.
Yeah. So
but they had stats in here.
By leveraging the thermal imaging, you could more accurately determine the order of the numbers or whichever word
so
that were
here
depressed.
They say Thermosecure, which is their proof of concept code, I would imagine, could crack 16 character passwords 67% of the time. 12 characters was 82% of the time, and 8 characters were 93% of the time.
I believe
if it's a 4-digit pin on a numeric keypad, you can imagine it probably close to 100% of the time.
Yep.
Well, it shows that 6 characters or less were 100% of the time.
It's awesome.
They were detected. And I find that pretty shocking that even with 16 character passwords, it was still 67% of the time. That's really high.
That's still pretty good. So I thought that was pretty cool research.
So thinking about how to defeat this attack, like let's say I had a 4-digit pin of 1234.
I got to change the password to my luggage.
Yep. But and 4-digit pin that can be broken. So what if it was 123412? Thinking about how the thermal attack would work, by determining the order, that if they looked at that likely 3412 would be the password that they would check for potentially 4 digits. Because I reused 1 and 2, so the thermal temperature for 1 and 2 on the second use.
Right.
So I could do a 20-character password of 1234, 1234, 1234, 1234, 1234.
Crack that in less of a time as if you were to use seemingly random, pseudo-random numbers.
Because
or whatever.
you would, if I used 1234 5 times as a 20-character password, thermal imaging would reveal that it appeared to only use 4 digits, and in the order in which they were used was 1234.
Yeah, would that negatively or positively impact your ability to crack it now?
I would say it would negative, because if you look at the thermal imaging data to determine order,
right? You're better off just doing 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, and then I don't know what order and how many times, but I'm pressing the same 2 keys in thermal imaging.
And the thermal imaging would be able to determine based on the temperature, 1 was pressed first, second, 2 was pressed second, and then 1 was pressed 1 2 1 2 1 2, and then you'd look at it and go, oh, it's a 2-digit password, because they only have 2 values, but you don't know how many times it was actually pressed.
They don't know how many. That's the variable you don't know, is how many times they were pressed.
Arguably, over time, they could evaluate that the longer you touch that one section of screen, the warmer it got.
So more 1s than 2s they could determine.
Or the fact that you are doing
it'd be interesting way to defeat it. Yeah.
So you could, hey, in a password that we observed in Paul doing of a password of 1234, they only got to about so many 10 degrees Celsius. But when he did 1234 1234 1234 1234, they got to 12 degrees Celsius.
What if you're wearing gloves while you're typing in the password and limiting the heat transfer.
That was my first question. It's
there
like,
you go, Mandy.
I would go to gloves, or I would go to using a stylus if it's actually something that you're entering on a keypad. I mean,
yep. I mean,
limit the heat transfer.
Yep, both the heat and the stylus would still transfer heat, but it would be
way much harder, right?
Way less.
Yeah,
because there's still friction when you. I don't know. I mean, how sensitive is the thermal camera to detect friction from a stylus?
Probably not the friction from the stylus, but I'd argue heat transfer from your hand to the stylus to warm up the stylus.
Mm-hmm. It'd be probably less accurate. And they should test that.
If you're less accurate.
I don't have a thermal camera, but now I want to see that tested.
And if your stylus is kept in the sling for your phone, the phone is already probably warmer than ambient temperature.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or you put your stylus in the freezer before you enter your passcode.
Which would then make it colder than ambient temperature.
Right. That might actually work to the advantage of the password cracker.
Yep.
Because then they could see which keys were pressed by a cold stylus.
Yep.
It's really super interesting.
Yep. And you know, I think about like some of the door locks that I have interacted with, like the physical door locks as opposed to the iPhone or something of the like, that would 4 or 3 button presses, and the buttons were aluminum, and those things heat up and cool down very quickly.
Very quickly, right?
So minimal heat transfer, even a minimal heat transfer, is like a glove or a stylus, would probably change the thermal properties of those pretty quickly. I'm guessing.
Well, what about like an overlay on the keyboard that's something that just absorbs the heat?
Yep. Now, I can see it now. We're going to have temperature-controlled keys on all of our door locks, and that all of them are of variable temperature.
On high security stuff,
they changed the order of the keys. On the high security stuff.
Oh, it's an LED that you can change.
You go up to the keypad, and every time the keypad is accessed, the digits are in a random order.
Because the keys have essentially a small LED light on it that changes the.
Or an 8-segment display or 7-segment display.
You need firmware to do the mapping and to tell what.
Yep. And how's your random number generator?
And then you have to seed that somehow.
Yep.
My story number 1 was really interesting, and I need to spend a lot more time researching it because it gets into Linux kernel internals. It's an awesome article, very deep technical. But I remember having a conversation, I believe it was at RSA, with a startup that was using eBPF to do monitoring and talking about like kind of similar to sometimes how I describe firmware. And there's like a finite number of people in the world that technically understand a subject matter to a level that you could, 1, understand how it works, and 2, how to construct attacks, right? Which are 2 different things. And to use eBPF, this article does a good job of describing it. But also, you need to also have an understanding of like kernel structures, and kernel internals, which not everyone's a kernel developer, right? And it was interesting when I was at RSA and I was talking to the folks we were kernel developers to a certain extent. And based on that knowledge and understanding, we were able to develop, in their case, not an offensive technology, but a defensive technology that uses eBPF. It's basically a way to get telemetry about what's happening inside of your Linux kernel. And so this article stood out to me in not just defining how eBPF works, but also going into how you can defeat eBPF security monitoring in I think they listed 8 different ways. Awesome research, definitely. But what I took from that is it's one of the things that I love about specifically Linux. Mm-hmm. Just when you think you know something, you realize how much you don't know.
No, yep.
Right, and it's I love that constant learning process, like the movie Always Be Closing.
Yes,
always be learning, right? And Linux just forces you to do that, because number 1, there's changes, but number 2, there's so much under the covers to understand. Totally. And those 2 things combined means you're always learning about something. So this definitely I wish I could do it more justice on the show. Maybe we'll revisit it. Maybe we'll bring on a guest or subject matter expert on kernel internals and eBPF, which again, like you need to be specialized in that. Like that's just something some people could definitely read up and study it and come up to speed quickly. Certainly a hacker trait, right? But I think the person who constructed this article, Doyen-Sec, Lorenzo Stella, right, has spent some serious time with the Linux kernel, diagrams, the whole thing. So definitely a good primer. And I guarantee when like most of us read this article, we're going to be like, well, I got like a lot more research to do. Kind of how I iterate, by the way, final tip. When I read something like this that's describing something super technical, I tend to go back and find other technical resources that give me the foundation in the background. And then I come back and I read the article and I get more out of it. And then I go back and I do more learning and more training, and I find training modules and I do some of it in practice even. Then I come back and I read the article again.
And you get even more out of it.
I get even more out of it, right? So it's like that iterative process that I find myself doing, especially working for Eclipsium and digging into some of these like really super technical firmware. Like the UEFI specification is thousands of pages, right? So I find myself doing that. So
what I really appreciate that, Paul, is that you're always willing to learn some new technique under the sheets.
That too. But also, like, I feel like I've been using Linux for well over 20 years, and I'm still learning. That's what keeps me going. Like every day when I wake up, I'm super excited to do like cool technical stuff because I'm always learning, right? I'm always like, I didn't know that. Like I got to go back.
I'm gonna say it's really probably been over 20 years. Because if I think about the first time I installed Linux, it was about 1995, and it was Slackware 1.
I think I had one Slackware over one of my
several floppies.
I think I did Slackware just to learn. Again, it's one of the nice things about Linux is you can experiment with all. One of the things about freedom is everyone has the freedom to create their own thing, but you got to learn all those new things.
You got to learn every country's method of freedom.
I mean, you don't have to, but I think the hacker in us wants to learn those things and continue to experiment and go, like, what happens if I install Slackware and learn it? Like, I'm going to pick up a few things, maybe, right?
Yep.
And I have to say, on the Linux distro front, big fan of Arch Linux.
Specifically Manjaro.
Specifically, I've got Manjaro on this laptop that I'm using here for the show. I'm really digging it. I'm thinking of slowly making the progression and converting because I'm frustrated with.
But don't convert because then you learn a little bit about all of them as time goes on.
Exactly. That's the thing. Again, you're always learning.
Always be learning. Always be hustling.
Always be learning.
Always be hustling.
Mandy, any of this? Did you want to cover one last story before we close out?
Do I want to? Sure. What do I have?
You had something on.
I don't think it's a whether you want to or not. I think it's Mandy. Please cover one more story.
You had one on Emotet and one on Apple. So,
and you could cover someone else.
You could cover both if you wanted to. I mean.
Okay. Well, I'll go to the one on Apple because basically I have one question I wondered from the other host. So Apple is now offering this Ask Apple for developers, meaning that the developers can get a little bit deeper into discussions, one-on-ones or trainings with people who are in Apple and do every part of things. I mean, it even talks about being able to get code level help from Apple.
So it's like the Genius Bar for developers?
Right.
Oh, interesting.
And so I was wondering with that, now, if you're thinking your average developers from around the world, be able to communicate like this, especially being able to get code level questions answered, what impact do you think that would have on security being built into what they're developing?
Oh. Yeah, how much are they going to tell you? I love this article, Mandy, because I have a lot of questions, specifically about how the lower level components work in M1 and M2. Because I spent some time, going back to our learning conversation, I've spent some time studying how Intel processor architecture works, how UEFI works, how the boot process works, how all these things that we talked about earlier, boot guard, BIOS guard work, right? And I'm like, I've barely scratched the surface. And like I work with people that used to work at Intel And I'm just lucky that like I have them to explain stuff to me so I can really advance my learning, which I guess is another tip. Like find a mentor because like that really helps to have someone that has been doing, like I've been in security for 20 plus years, but I work with people who worked at Intel a really long time ago and have that background, and I can ask them questions.
They have a different skill set.
Different skill set totally helps for you to come up on your learning. So like I feel like I'm getting a really good education on Intel architecture. When you go to ARM architecture and how Apple implements it, it could be totally different.
Right.
And so like I have questions for Apple, like in Intel it works this way to validate things like secure boot, to how do I update my firmware? How are those firmware updates validated? That Apple doesn't necessarily publish. And albeit like there are some things out there on the internet that tell me certain things, and I read them and I'm kind of like, is this true? Is this not true? Like if Apple hasn't produced official documentation on it, how do we know that's actually how it works? I'd love to use, like, I don't know how much they would tell me about that. Because again, it kind of goes back to like, if I give you the secret sauce and how it works, you're just going to find ways around that and develop vulnerabilities. It's the basically it's the reason like YouTube doesn't tell you how the algorithm works to filter content. Filter content, right? Because if they told me how it worked, the hacker in all of us, right?
we have a million subscribers.
Oh wait, how do I get around that? Does that mean I could publish inappropriate videos to YouTube and get around your filters because you told me how they worked? I feel like Apple has the same thing. So for that reason, Mandy, I think this is super interesting.
Similar type of thing from a little bit higher level. I was having a conversation with someone today that said, basically, hey, we were working on this mobile app and found that this configuration for the network stuff had this particular flag in the networking component enabled. But Apple says that if you have this particular flag enabled and you submit it to the Apple Store, the iTunes, the app directory, the App Store, that method is automatically going to get you flagged, and you have to justify why you're using that method within your app. Like, hey, you've got this thing. Why are you doing that? And you have to have a good response. And this particular company's app didn't even get flagged, and they didn't even get asked a question.
Is that TikTok?
Nope.
TikTok is guilty of that.
Nope.
I mean, we've seen the research from people that are like, I pulled apart the TikTok app and like, how is it even in the various? They've got an amazing method to get that through. How are they even allowing that?
Yeah.
Or are they making exceptions on that based on the fact that I'm an Apple user and I want to run TikTok, and if I pulled that from the store, people would be pissed.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. Or more importantly, how did it even get in the store to begin with, without having to ask that question? And in this particular case,
they must have had answers to that question.
No, they were never asked the question.
Oh, interesting. Are they asking it now because of the access that TikTok has?
Well, I mean, this particular app that this person was testing, this app was never asked the question, why do they have those features enabled? Which they're supposed to ask. They were never asked the question, and it went right through.
That's
a whole different.
Holy crap! We could do a whole episode just on that topic alone.
I'd ask those genius folks at the Genius Bar about, hey, if I include this, is it going to get flagged? Yeah, it's going to get flagged. Well, what happens if I do it anyways? It's not going to get flagged. So I should just do it anyways.
Oh, along those lines, if you haven't listened to Security Cryptography Whatever podcast, remember Thomas Tacek? We did an interview with him.
Yeah.
He's one of the hosts on that show.
Nice.
A brilliant security researcher. I forget the name of the woman on that show. Equally as amazing. Her knowledge of crypto is mind-blowing to me. They do an amazing show. But they interviewed Nate Lawson in a 2-part episode. It's like a must listen. Like if you're a podcast listener, like when you're done listening to our show, as we round out the show, right? Go subscribe to Security Cryptography Whatever, and make in the kind of key episodes for me are part 1 and part 2 with Nate Lawson, where this is coming around to what you're talking about, Larry. Nate was I think the founder or co-founder of Source DNA, which basically picked apart apps in the App Store and reverse engineered them and created a map of them. And Apple bought his company, and he worked at Apple for a while. To speak to what you're talking about, is if you were Apple, you would want that technology.
Yeah.
To do exactly what you're talking about, like pick apart an app and go like, what is this app doing? Should I allow it in the store or not? They bought Nate's company.
Nice.
And he talks about a little bit about that company, but Nate also did amazing stuff throughout his career. Great interview, 2-part episode.
Nice.
It's good stuff.
So last one, Mandy, tell us about Emotet.
Of course, you ask about this one as my brain is shutting down for the day.
Yeah.
All right. I honestly don't even know if I'll be able to remember all of this.
Yeah, like I want to know, the one thing that struck me about this one, Mandy, was it was the title was Emotet Exposed: A Look Inside the Cyber Criminal Supply Chain, which is an interesting title in and of itself. But the one thing they said was how to create an Emotet sock puppet. I wasn't sure what they meant by sock puppet. I'm assuming that's like a metaphor for something that this malware kit does, and I wasn't able to dissect. I'm sure people that work in malware all day long are yelling at me right now going, oh, I know what a sock puppet is. Put me on the show, Paul. Please contact us. Love to have you on the show and talk about this, because I don't do malware research or reverse engineering as my day job, and if you do, we definitely want to talk to you, right?
And now I remember why I didn't get to download the report and read this one, but I found that I thought it was going to be fascinating. So I apologize for not knowing more on it right now, but
yeah, and the report also mentions, because it is gated by a registration, but like they talk about how to extract the recently updated Emotet configuration, correlating infection techniques in Emotet's network infrastructure, like it sounds like the report is a breakdown of how Emotet works, which is interesting. Again, going back to the title, A Look Inside the Cyber Criminal Supply Chain. Who published this one? VMware. Interesting. VMware's research team.
Huh. They're doing a little bit more extrospection as opposed to introspection, right?
That could be a cool segment on the show. I mean, we can work that. We could get someone to talk about that.
I think it sounds fantastic. And I'll have to read the report.
As will we all.
Absolutely. Well, but I think there's a lot of content like this out there that is picking apart malware and talking about how it works. And I think you could probably have an entire podcast that just talks about that, right?
If there isn't already.
If there isn't already, that like looks at all the reports on various malware and how they work, and talking about that, right? But I think it's cool to kind of dive into select malware and select reports that are really, because it gives you kind of a insight into how the attackers' minds are working and what tools and techniques, TTPs, if you will, that they're using. So.
Well, yeah, because even this, I think one of the key things that I zeroed in on was where it said that the VMware Threat Analysis Unit was able to dissect how it quickly changes its command and control infrastructure, obfuscates its configuration, adapts and tests, and deploys. Like, if they've been able to get that in depth with this, it seems like that would be an incredibly useful use case, like even for learning about malware. So for newer people who are coming into security, maybe this would be a good one to start really diving into.
So this article says each target needs to be entrapped in an elaborate, realistic conversation held by fake personas or sock puppets. So sock puppets are defined a person whose actions are controlled by another. That's interesting. I had not heard that.
No,
in relation
you've not heard that term.
I mean, I've seen it out there,
but not in relation to malware.
But not. I haven't done like a deep dive into like actually what it means. I have seen the term kind of floating around. Reference to manipulation of a hand sock puppet. Obviously, an actual sock puppet. Refer to alternate online identities or user accounts used for purposes of deception, which we've talked about in the past. I don't think referred to them as sock puppets. Sock puppets that Jack Daniel used to have, like sock puppets, right? And it wasn't related to describe how malware, cyber criminal actors are working.
I mean, I'd argue sock puppet, like you have 12 accounts on Twitter One of them is Benny Lava, and like now but you're not really Benny Lava.
I think we also refer to them as like Russian GRU has created an account for purposes of like that would be an alternative online identity or user account used for purposes of deception.
Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed.
Interesting.
Hey, with that,
let's run it out.
I think it's time.
Well, thanks everyone for listening and watching. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.